Among the best college recruits in the 2024 class, and you may not have heard of him yet. That is how French guard Nolan Traore was recently described, and there's a really good chance he's going to be a Zag next season.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by GameTime. Folks, download the GameTime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDON, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. What is a recruiting episode here on the Locked On Zags podcast? We got a 2024 target to talk about, some 2025 targets to give updates on things we have heard in the last couple of weeks, getting ready for big Isiah Harwell's visit. We'll talk about that as well. We also got some injury updates around the WCC, what this means for Gonzaga, what it could mean for their upcoming games against Santa Clara and St. Mary's. We'll get to that. We'll close out the show with a discussion about Tommy Lloyd getting a big-time extension from the Arizona Wildcats. But let's start with Nolan Traore, a player we have yet to discuss here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Nolan Traore is a 2024 target, and that quote that I read in the cold open there is from Travis Branham at 24/7 Sports, a very respected high school recruiting analyst. Has written a lot of great articles at 24/7 Sports, definitely worth checking out. I'll read the quote again. Among the best college recruits in the 2024 class, and you may not have heard of him yet. Nolan Traore is a 6'5" guard. He is French. He is from France. Listed or described as a fluid athlete with a good build, can play the one, can play the two. I watched a few clips of him. There's not a lot of tape really out there right now. That's why he hasn't been heard of by very many people, but he moves really well with the basketball. He's a good facilitator. He talked to Travis about how he likes to facilitate. He likes to be a distributor, but he can go get a basket if he needs to. He can play both the one and the two. And we talked about this when we did a recent episode about Gonzaga's kind of recruiting strategy as of late. And they really are targeting bigger guards. This has been a huge, I think last time we did a show, we talked about 6 or 7 different Gonzaga targets between 24 and 25 and even beyond. And everybody Gonzaga is looking at are guards between 6'5" and 6'6", all of them. This is pretty clearly an area of emphasis for the Zags right now, is getting these bigger bodied guards. Traore absolutely fits into that conversation. Part of the reason he's coming up right now is because there was a big Basketball Without Borders event. Traore participated in that. So did a couple other Gonzaga targets who we are going to talk about momentarily. But his performance at that event, where we saw some of the clips of him, has kind of put him even more so on the radar than he was previously. Now, Gonzaga, as they so often are, seems to be a bit ahead of the game here. It is unbelievably common for a prospect to pop off after Gonzaga has already reached out, has already made contact, has already established a relationship. They are incredibly good at identifying pre-breakout talent. It is an extraordinary skill set of not just Mark Few, of course, but of the entire staff. Traore actually came to Gonzaga in December. He was sitting on the floor, or in the arena, I should say, when Gonzaga played San Diego State on December 29th. The person sitting next to him was Killian Tillie. Gonzaga has utilized Tillie. They've utilized former players as ways to make connections with recruits. This is not new to them. This is something they have done quite a bit in their past. It has helped them land significant amount of not just international talent, but domestic talent as well. So for Traore, he got an opportunity to come to Spokane, to see the facilities, to see the kennel, and what was a bit of a subdued environment. I don't think that recruits are going home being like, well, they lost, so that school's out. Like, that's not how high school players, that's not how young kids think about this. But it is a bit unfortunate that he didn't get to see the kennel, like, be the kennel, just because the students weren't in the McCarthy Athletic Center. But got a chance to speak with Killian, got an opportunity to kind of make that connection with somebody else who made the journey from France to the United States, to Spokane, Washington, somebody who obviously thrived during his 4 years here in Spokane. So really good opportunity for him to do that. He had a quote. He had a handful of quotes about the teams that he's visited. He started every single quote by saying, "That was great." So I don't know that means a whole lot, but his direct quote about his time in Spokane, he says, "That was great. I met great people. I liked it. I did basic stuff like get to know everyone in their staff, see the facilities, visit the city." So not a whole lot of depth to that conversation there, but obviously getting the opportunity to come to Spokane, clearly Gonzaga is invested. Clearly they are interested in this young man and what he could potentially bring to this team. He's also taken visits to both Alabama and Xavier, which he described, like I said, as "that was great." So hard to read too much into the situation here. Traore has also considering potentially going pro as well. The NBL is an option for him. Europe, just playing professionally in Europe is an option as well. So he's not like gung-ho 100%. I'm going to the United States. I'm going to play college basketball, but he might. And obviously there are three very premier programs showing interest here. Alabama and Gonzaga have been in recruiting battles for seemingly a very long time. They always seem to be in on the same couple of guys. Sean Miller and Mark Few have gotten very used to seeing each other out on the recruiting trail as well. So not a shock to see those be the other two programs who are invested in Traore and what he could potentially bring to Gonzaga. But if this happens, no guarantee, of course, at this point, that changes the conversation that we have had about the 2024 recruiting class, which as of right now is empty for the Zags. They have no recruits coming into 2024. Now, they also only have one player guaranteed to leave the roster after this year in Anton Watson. So I can understand why there's not a huge push to be adding a bunch of recruits in 2024 when they don't know what the roster situation is going to look like. Now, they have open scholarships, so they can add players regardless of if anybody else transfers or not. But the fact that Gonzaga's involved in a player here who is being considered like, hey, this is somebody who's really good and could end up being one of the better players in this class is a testament to what we've always known for a long time, that Mark Few and the Zags, they find ways. They always find a way. We'll see what happens here with Traore. Still a long time to go here. It doesn't sound like he's planning to make his mind up anytime soon, but could potentially be the first player in the 2024 recruiting class for Gonzaga and a potentially really good one coming to Spokane next year. Going to move on to a 2025 target. We'll talk about a handful of other guys in the second segment as well. But I also, speaking of basketball without borders, Julius Halaifonua is another target for Gonzaga. We've spoken about him a handful of times on the show already. He had an opportunity to speak with On3's Jamie Shaw and spoke a little bit about Gonzaga, about some of the visits he's taken. He also participated in this Basketball Without Borders tournament very recently. He is currently playing at the NBA Global Academy in Australia, but he is from New Zealand. He is a 7'1", 290-pound center. This dude is big, strong dude. He is also a very skilled big man. He can shoot threes. He loves to facilitate. He described himself as kind of a point center, point forward type. He says he likes to operate as kind of like have the offense run through him, make passes, distribute the basketball, get his teammates in positions to score. He can also space the floor. That sounds like a Gonzaga big to me. This is how Gonzaga likes to run their offense. Not always, of course, they just give Graham Ike the ball down low and let him go to work. But when they bring their bigs out, like they've done with Drew Timme, and let him kind of make decisions with the basketball, they are really, really tough to defend. And I think he could be a really good fit based on that description, based on the limited amount of video that we have seen on him up to this point. He's playing with the New Zealand junior national team right now, averaging 11.5 points and 7.5 rebounds. His quote, again, to Jamie Shaw at On3 Sports, he said, "They're a high-powered school. Their recruiting is amazing and their facilities are great. They're a school I could go in and work my butt off and know I could get to where I want to go." Now, he has not officially visited Gonzaga, although he has indicated he is working to set up a visit in that regard. He is also working to set up visits at Marquette and Georgetown, and he has visited both Xavier and Virginia Tech. There's that Sean Miller in there again, trying to get some of these same guys that Gonzaga is looking at. So he's got some interest. He's got some interest from some pretty powerful programs, all Power 6 programs right there, a couple in the Big East, 3 in the Big East, actually. Virginia Tech, who just blasted Virginia on Monday night. So some big schools here involved in Halifonua's recruitment, but if you're a big man, going to Gonzaga is almost always a good decision. Those international bigs have had plenty of success in Spokane, Washington. So 2 players right there in Traore from France and Halifonua from New Zealand, playing in Australia currently, that could end up being future Zags and more concrete proof that Gonzaga's international recruiting is certainly top notch. We'll see if they land these guys It's one thing to recruit them, but you've got to be able to land them. But certainly some promise based on those quotes from those two guys right there. We got another 2025 target to talk about. He spoke about his visit to Gonzaga. More on that and the status of two Gonzaga priority targets who we haven't heard an update on in a while. All of that coming up after a word from today's sponsor, GameTime. Sometimes family events are best when they are planned spur of the moment. And for that, you need GameTime, because GameTime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all of the sports and music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, GameTime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. We're only a few weeks away from the WCC tournament in Las Vegas. If you're hoping to go for a day or two and just looking for individual tickets, GameTime is perfect for that type of event. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. And right now, new GameTime users who use code LOCKEDON will get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download GameTime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still a Locked On Zags podcast, and we're still talking recruiting here on a Wednesday edition of Locked On Zags. We spoke about 2024 target Nolan Traore and then 2025 big man target Julius Halaifonua in that first segment. Got a couple other guys I want to talk about here, all in that 2025 class. We know there's not a ton of targets Gonzaga has been pursuing in 2024, but one of the guys who's been kind of popped up on the radar in 2025 for Gonzaga and a handful of other programs is Davis Fogle. Davis Fogle is a 6'5", that's right, they're all around that same size, 6'5" combo guard from Anacortes High School in Anacortes, Washington. Anybody who's ever been to the San Juan Islands knows where Anacortes is. That is a little town that you take the ferry out into those beautiful, beautiful islands in the Pacific Northwest. Not a big town whatsoever. Kind of shocking to see a top 100, top 75 recruit coming from such a small high school in Anacortes. But he is 71st right now. The On3 industry rankings in the class of 2025. On3 themselves actually ranks him 56th in the 2025 class, while he is 71st exactly at 247 Sports, 92nd at Rivals. Now, Fogle has only taken one official visit, and it was not to Gonzaga. It was actually to Nebraska, where he went to go hang out with Fred Hoiberg's team. He had some very good things to say about Nebraska. Nebraska is considered the favorite right now, according to the prospect ranking sites, but Fogle has been to Gonzaga. He's been to Gonzaga multiple times. Reportedly, he has been there for camps. He has been interested in the school for a long time. Makes sense as, somebody who grew up in the state of Washington. They're the best basketball program in the state of Washington over the last 4 years, 6 years, 8 years since he's been a middle school, high school basketball player. So not surprising that Gonzaga kind of carries some allure for him. He also went to see Gonzaga's first game this season against Yale. So he's been to Gonzaga very recently. It was not an official visit, but he did have a quote in this article talking about his visit to Gonzaga. He says, "I went there for their first game of the year against Yale. I watched their shoot around. I see how much they develop their guys. If you go there, you will leave a better player. They put guys into the league. The coaching staff is friendly and nice." And look, he had quotes about all the other schools that he's looking at. And it is not a super helpful endeavor to read too much into these quotes most of the time. I joked about it with Nolan Traore saying, that was great, because they're teenagers and they're being interviewed for one of the first times in their life. I don't think taking these quotes super seriously is really going to solve anything. It's not necessarily going to give you any super big clues. Having said all of that, his quote about Gonzaga was longer and seemed to be more, he clearly has an affinity for Gonzaga. He's been to the school before. It's the premier program in the state. The expectation, and this is not concrete anywhere because nobody would say this concretely, but the general consensus vibe is that Fogle would come to Gonzaga if they were to make him an offer. But Gonzaga has yet to make him an offer. He is also being recruited, in addition to Nebraska, he's also being recruited by Clemson and Louisville in the ACC. He is being recruited by UW to stay much closer to home in the same state. He has also been recruited by Leon Rice at Boise State. And if Gonzaga never makes him the offer and he wants to get back at him and stick it to him, Coach Randy Bennett and the Gales have been recruiting him as well. He has indicated he doesn't plan to commit until next fall. He's kind of hoping to weigh his options throughout the summer, play in the summer circuit, potentially get some more intrigue in his game by doing successfully this summer. So there's still a lot of time, a lot of things that could change with Fogle right now, but he has played very good this high school basketball season. It seems he is invested and interested in Gonzaga. We know that Stephen Gentry has been recruiting him. Certainly there is at least some level of interest on both sides. If Gonzaga does decide that Fogle is a player they want to go after, maybe they're waiting on Harwell, maybe they're waiting on some other things, maybe they're just waiting. They just haven't felt comfortable fully making the offer yet, but it sounds like this is a possibility of a player Gonzaga could land were they to fully invest in doing so. I'll give you an example of this. Ben Gregg was waiting for an official offer from Gonzaga. Gonzaga found out they were not going to land Paolo Banchero. They had already landed Chet Holmgren, but they weren't also going to land Paolo Banchero, which that's a what if for another day. But since they did not land Banchero, they made an offer to Ben Gregg. I think I have my timeline correct, but effectively they made an offer to Ben Gregg. Ben announced that he was going to make his college basketball decision public like a week later. He did it on his grandma's birthday, who's from Spokane, said he was coming to Gonzaga. It felt like he always was going to come to Gonzaga, assuming they made him that offer. Once they did, things moved in that direction. Perhaps we will have another story similar to that with Davis Fogle. Well, I mentioned Harwell right there, and that is the big one, the big fish, the biggest story for Gonzaga on the recruiting trail right now. Isiah Harwell set to visit this weekend, February 24th, when Gonzaga hosts the Broncos of Santa Clara. Harwell is currently the 7th-ranked player in the 2025 class. Not 70th, like Davis Fogle was, 7th, top 10 player in this class. He is a 6'5" guard, shocker, right? From Pocatello, Idaho. He plays the same high school that Nolan Hickman played at. They have a connection. He's reposted videos of Nolan Hickman on his Instagram story. It seems like those two guys are close. He is currently injured, though that is a big storyline for him right now. The extent, you don't find a lot of updates on high school injuries right now, so it's hard to find a lot of details there on the situation with him, but it sounds like a fairly significant injury. Likely won't impact him like by the time he would come to Gonzaga. That's not till 2025. Some thought he might reclassify. It does potentially impact the timeline for him reclassifying, although I thought that was always kind of unlikely. It never seemed like something he was necessarily super tied to doing. The fact that he hasn't committed to a school yet probably means he's not reclassifying, although guys do that fairly late sometimes. Regardless, Harwell's got plenty of attention. North Carolina is pretty involved. BYU's involved. Houston is involved. Kelvin Sampson has come out and watched him. Hubert Davis at North Carolina has come out and watched him. Harwell has said in the past that North Carolina is his dream school. And a lot of people have used that quote to be like, well, feels like Gonzaga might be out. I don't know that necessarily means that. It's not great. I wouldn't say it's good news for Gonzaga that Harwell has indicated North Carolina is his dream school, but he's from the Pacific Northwest. He's from Idaho. His dad played at Idaho State. He's got this connection with Nolan Hickman right now. Most of the recruiting services indicate that Gonzaga is in the lead for Harwell. He hasn't taken visits to North Carolina or Houston or any of those other programs, but he rescheduled his visit. He was going to visit for the St. Mary's game in early February, opted not to do that because of the injury, but still rescheduled a visit to come to Spokane shortly after. So I think there's obviously some interest. He wants to come to campus. We know that pretty conclusively. He wants to be on campus. Gonzaga wants him as a recruit, a top 10 player, really, really talented guard, more of a 2 than a 1, but could probably play both in a pinch. Like, he's a really good player. So there's mutual interest right now. That's what we know. So hopefully his visit will be fruitful for him. He will learn more about the campus. He will feel more comfortable about potentially coming to this school. Gonzaga will obviously get an understanding of his injury. They probably already have a good sense of it right now. And maybe things could move kind of quickly from here. I do think that Gonzaga waiting on Harwell could be slowing down some of the other recruiting stuff that we haven't heard any updates on, although they have plenty of scholarships open for 2025, but they may just be waiting to see where they want to kind of put all their chips in, where all the pieces are going to fit together. Another one of those pieces is Nik Khamenia, a player we've talked about quite a few times here on the Locked On Zags podcast. He is a 40th ranked prospect in the 2025 class. He is a 6'8", 3-4 hybrid. Think kind of Corey Kispert, Julian Strother, where they played. Strother didn't play as much of the 4, but Corey kind of played both the 3 and the 4. And he's having a great season at Harvard Westlake High School in Studio City, California. He's basically the consensus 40th prospect. Like every recruiting service had him almost exactly 40th on their rankings. He visited Gonzaga in October officially. He visited Gonzaga the previous year unofficially. Both of those were at Craziness in the Kennel. The only update to his recruiting on On3's website, on 24/7 Sports' website, since his official visit to Spokane in October is an offer from St. John's. That's the only update that has been posted in that regard. We've seen updates about how his season has gone, some quotes from him talking about his visits, the schools that are showing interest, but there haven't been a lot of movement. And that's fine. He's a 2025 kid. There's no rush to commit to high school or to commit to your next college before that. Like, you don't have to commit super early. So I don't blame him for not jumping on the opportunity and committing super early. He's weighing his options, and that's fine. But I know that there's been some kind of consternation about why it has taken so long for Khamenia to commit. Ideally, he does end up a Zag. I'll tell you this. Last time I spoke about Nik Khamenia on the podcast, I heard from Sean Farnham, the great Sean Farnham, about Khamenia. He talked about how great of a player he was. He posted this on Twitter. He said he's seen him play quite a few times in California, really loves his game, thinks he'd be a great fit at Gonzaga. So, Sean, if you're listening, let me know if there's any update. If you hear anything about Khamenia, we'd love to know, because we're in agreement with you, buddy. And we think he's a fantastic player and a great future Zag, just hoping that he sees that and makes that decision as well. We're going to close out the show moving away from recruiting. We're going to talk about an injury to Joshua Jefferson at St. Mary's, also an injury for Santa Clara's Adama Alpha-Bal, and how that could be a stroke of luck for the Zags heading into their last few big games of the season. More on all that coming up after a word from today's sponsor, FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 in your pocket if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA Zag players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. And I'll continue to say it, the Gonzaga women's team still 240-1 odds to win the national championship. It's a fantastic bet. They're looking like they're going to be a 5, maybe a 4 seed. They have already beat 1 seed caliber teams this season. $5 down on Lisa Fortier's team nets you $1,200 and a banner at the McCarthy Athletic Center. What a day that would be. If you want to join me in making that bet, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right, closing out today's show. It is WCC Wednesday. We made it a recruiting show today, but there's always a little bit of WCC talk on Wednesdays. And we got a pair of big injuries to discuss right now as Gonzaga gets into some of the meatiest parts of their schedule. We'll get you a big old preview for Gonzaga's game against the Portland Pilots on Thursday. I will also be in the house at the Child Center for that one. So anybody who's going to be at that game, give me a shout on Twitter, join the Discord channel, and let me know there. Hoping to see plenty of you at that one. And I am recording this before the San Francisco St. Mary's game, which is Tuesday night at 8 p.m. By the time you're listening to this, that game has happened. So this recording is going to be a bit dated. But right now, the latest we have on St. Mary's is that Joshua Jefferson, starting power forward, he's out indefinitely with a left knee injury. Indefinitely is a very vague description. Could be the rest of the season. You might be thinking, Andy, he played last night against San Francisco, in which case, disregard, apologies. But right now, it sounds like Jefferson's probably going to be out for a bit. He was injured against Portland on February 10th. He did not play against Pepperdine last week. Didn't matter. The Gales won 103-59 in that game. But afterwards, Randy Bennett was talking about Jefferson, and he said, Joshua gives us a lot. He's become a really good player. Those are big shoes to fill. And I don't think you say that about a guy who you think is going to be back a week later. Of course, things change. Maybe they weren't sure at that time, and then they got some clarity, and maybe he's going to be back sooner. But it sounds like there's a pretty reasonable chance Jefferson will not play the rest of the regular season, which could include Gonzaga's game on March 2nd in Moraga against the Gales. That's a big storyline. Joshua Jefferson is very, very good, averaging 10.2 points and 6.5 boards per game, but his impact is on the defensive end of the floor. He's one of the better, just big-bodied athletes that we've seen Randy Bennett and the Gales have. They've had some great bigs, they've had some great guards, but just like big, strong forwards haven't been an area that Bennett and the Gales have been able to land a lot of talent. And they did in Joshua Jefferson. He was rough as a freshman, but he's been very, very good this year as a sophomore. He played great defense against Anton Watson the first time these two teams played. Jefferson's impact on the defensive end of the floor in that game had a huge impact on the fact that Gonzaga didn't win it. St. Mary's is also a great defensive team in totality. Gonzaga's offense struggled. They had foul trouble, some officiating concerns at the end of that game, etc. The Jefferson's defense on Watson was a huge part of St. Mary's win. If he is out, that creates an area where Gonzaga can attack. St. Mary's will rely more on Alex Dukas. They will likely rely more on Harvard transfer Mason Forbes, Luke Barrett coming off the bench. They have some decent depth, so they can stomach this. But this is a really talented player that is potentially not going to play for Gonzaga or for St. Mary's against Gonzaga on March 2nd. It also potentially opens up the door for Anton Watson to win the WCC Defensive Player of the Year. For those who remember last week, we kind of redid our predictions for how those awards might shake out. I thought Joshua Jefferson was the front runner for Defensive Player of the Year. If he misses the rest of the season, he's unlikely to win that award. Could open it up for Watson, could open it up for Jonathan Mobo at San Francisco, Mitchell Saxon, the big man at St. Mary's as well. Certainly makes Watson's odds go up if Jefferson is unable to suit up for the rest of the year. Also want to talk about Adama Alpha-Bal from Santa Clara. He has not played since February 3rd. Everything I have seen is kind of not disclosing what's going on. It has been listed as undisclosed. There's some kind of injury that has prevented Ball from suiting up for Santa Clara for a while now. He was seen participating in a shoot-around before their game on February 17th, just on Saturday, but he didn't play. So the update is, it's kind of a non-update, unfortunately. I don't know at this point. Hopefully by Friday, when we do our big preview episode of Gonzaga's game against Santa Clara, we will have a better sense of whether Alpha-Bal is going to play or not, because he's really good. And you all don't need me to tell you that. You remember Joshua Jefferson being good for St. Mary's, but I'm certain you also remember Alpha-Bal and what he did against Gonzaga in that game that Gonzaga lost at Santa Clara, the Steve Nash game. He's been fantastic all year long, 15 points per game, 3.5 assists, shooting 36% from three, hit some really clutch shots down the stretch for Santa Clara in that loss, or in that win they had over Gonzaga back in the early part of the WCC season. He's a potential NBA player. They've had a couple of them lately with Jalen Williams 2 years ago, Brandon Pajemski for the Golden State Warriors this year. Alpha-Bal was a transfer from Arizona, 6'6" guard, really good athlete, creates some problems for Gonzaga from a mismatch perspective. If he is unable to suit up for Gonzaga on Saturday, that makes the path to a victory even bigger for the Zags. I expect Gonzaga to win on Saturday. They don't lose to the same team twice in the regular season very often. Santa Clara played really good in that game at home, but I don't think they'll play as well on the road. I think Gonzaga is going to take care of business in this one, but Alpha-Bal not suiting up for the Broncos would make it quite a bit easier for Gonzaga to win that one. I don't like when players are hurt. I don't want Jefferson or Ball to miss these games. I don't want them to miss any games. It sucks when guys are hurt. Gonzaga knows that more than anybody this year, but it seems like a possibility that Gonzaga could end up playing those two games without key starters available for both teams. And that's been a big storyline for the Zags this year in the WCC. They played LMU without Dominic Harris or Kelly Leapepe in their most recent game. They played San Diego without Deuce Turner, their best player. They played Portland without Tyler Harris, their star freshman. We'll see if he suits up on Thursday, but he did not suit up last time these two teams played. And while Javon Porter did play for Pepperdine when Gonzaga played them early in the season, he had just gotten back from an injury. I think the first time these two teams played was, Porter's third game, maybe his fourth game, since coming back from an injury. Injuries have been a storyline for the WCC. They have been a storyline for Gonzaga's games in conference play. I'm not trying to say, Gonzaga's had it easy. In fact, they've dealt with their injuries too. Steel Ventures has not played a single game. Every single WCC team has played Gonzaga without one of their starters because Steel Ventures was going to be a starter, and he has not played this year. So yeah, I'm not saying that Gonzaga deserves some, we still sympathize with Gonzaga for this. They're still down a player. Just like those other teams are down a player, they're down a player too. They were also without Luka Krajinovic for about a month. Now, Krajinovic wasn't as big of a rotation piece as some of these other players, as any of these other players, frankly. But for a team that didn't have a lot of depth, not having Krajinovic for a month, it was a problem. It was an issue for Gonzaga. And so having him back has been a huge boost for them. They're not getting Steel Ventures back, but now they might have an opportunity to play some other teams where they're not at full strength either. Closing it out quickly with an update on Tommy Lloyd, former Gonzaga assistant coach, associate head coach. He has signed an extension to stay at the University of Arizona through 2029. He was already signed through 2027, but this extension reworks his contract. Starting next year, he's going to make $5.25 million a year. That makes him one of the most highly paid coaches in college basketball. He was making like $2.5 to $3 million this year. That is a big bump for Tommy. His contract also escalates to the point where in 2029, he will be making $6 million. There's a lot of panic about the University of Arizona. They had financial issues. They just replaced their athletic director. Their football coach went to Washington to replace Callan DeBoer, who went to Alabama. So there was a lot of panic. If Arizona couldn't afford Jed Fish, are we going to still be able to afford Tommy Lloyd? The school's $240 million in debt that they couldn't account for. There's a lot of problems. Arizona made a statement saying, we're fine. They are also paying Tommy Lloyd exclusively with donor money. That is a flex to be able to say, we're going to pay our coach between $5 and $6 million for the next 6 years with donor money. Hats off to them for doing it. Hats off to Tommy Lloyd for getting the contract. That's a big storyline for him. I wonder if they were getting a little panicky at like Ohio State's got a job opening. West Virginia's got a job opening. I doubt that one was too appealing for Tommy, but Louisville's got a job opening. Who the heck knows what's going to happen at Kentucky, but there is a possibility that they have a job opening there. Maybe the school started to get a little, hey, we need to lock this down. We need to make sure that there's just no recipe here because we're about to go to the Big 12. We're going to get some more money. Let's just lock it down and pay our guy. Hats off to Tommy. What does it mean for Gonzaga? Nothing really. Mark Few is going to retire when Mark Few retires. If Tommy Lloyd's an option, great. If Tommy Lloyd's not an option, great. We just don't know. But Tommy is getting his bag, and that's good for him. And I hope that Gonzaga and Arizona can start playing each other here soon and kind of reignite a really fun West Coast rivalry with a little added juice because of the matchup between Few and Lloyd. It's going to wrap it up for us today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Join on the Discord channel if you have not done so yet. You can talk through all of these Gonzaga basketball games coming up this week. And again, come say hi to me at the Portland game on Thursday if you are going to be there. Thanks again. And until next time, as always, go Zags.